But we're talking about today, we're looking at Leviticus, starting in chapter 21. But when you think about where things are, you think about what's in a name and how important a name can be. Names, what someone is called, that's something that can either build somebody up or can tear them down. Names in the scriptures are revealing of character. They are often prophetic in nature. They're prophetic about the future of the person who has the name. They also carry the person's reputation with them. A good name is something that we are to strive for. Abraham, his name means talking about being a father of many nations. Noah talked about being a comfort. And Esau means red or earthy. And boy was he, because he had no interest in spiritual things, but was godless and immoral. And when you think about somebody's name and what the people are called, boy, sometimes I cringe at some of the things that I hear parents call their children, or what children even call their parents, or what husbands call their wives, and vice versa. You hear about he's a little stinker, or that's my old man or my old lady, and different things like that. So a name, what you call somebody, can be spoken of with affection, or it can be spoken in contempt. A name can be honored, or it can be slandered. A name can be made holy, or it can be profaned. And all of that puts things in some context for why the Father takes His name so seriously. When you look at how this passage is talking about in Exodus chapter 20, verse 7, he says, "You must not take the name of Adonai your God in vain, for Adonai will not hold him guiltless that takes his name in vain." That's one of the commandments, right? So he says, do not misuse the name of the Lord your God. That's another translation for it. And that Hebrew word, vain, or shav, means emptiness or vanity and falsehood. It's about bringing something to nothingness or making it worthless. And it's from this unused root, this verb, which means to rush over, to ravage, to destroy, or devastate. So in a lot of ways, he's saying, you shall not make his name empty. You shall not make his name false or worthless by your words or by your actions. So we learn, in that commandment, that God, He's very protective of His name and His reputation. And so those that love Him, those that claim to be His children, we should also be protective of God's name, even more than their own name, even more than their own family name. Anyone who has, you think about it like this, when anyone who has played with Legos or put together a puzzle knows that it's much easier to tear something down than it is to build it up. So you can spend a lot of time building up a name, but it doesn't take very long to tear one down. As in most things, people will remember the bad that you do more than they will remember the good that you do. And so even after years of being in a community, of being in a place where you're building up a reputation, for a good work ethic or doing a good job or whatever else, you can lose all of that in a moment. And those moments will stand out, and it can take years to put things back. Well, the Father, He has taken time to build His name's reputation. And He is very protective of it. And He wants us as His people to be protective of it. When you see this work out in Ezekiel chapter 20, He says, "Say to them, thus says Adonai Elohim, on the day that I chose Israel, I lifted up my hand to the seed of the house of Jacob, and made myself known to them in the land of Egypt. I lifted up my hand to them, saying, I am Adonai, your God. And on that day I lifted up my hand to them to bring them out." But is that in there twice? "In the land of Egypt, into a land that I had sought out for them, flowing with milk and honey, the splendor of all lands. And I said to them, each of you must throw away every detestable thing from his eyes, and not defile yourselves with the idols of Egypt. I am Adonai, your God." So he's doing all of that. Look at all the things that he says that he has done to prove and to build up his name. And he only asks that they throw out their idols, the detestable things, those things that are in competition with him, those things that want to take his place, those things that we might want to claim or say is better than him, when he knows that they are not. And he is saying, get rid of those things that want to take my place. But instead, he says this in verse 8, but they rebelled against me and were unwilling to listen to me. None of them cast away their detestable things that were before their eyes, nor did they forsake the idols of Egypt. And so I resolved to pour out my fury upon them, to expend my anger upon them in the midst of the land of Egypt. But I acted for the sake of my name, to keep it from being profaned in the eyes of the nations, where they were, in whose sight I made myself known to them, to bring them out of the land of Egypt. So I led them out from the land of Egypt and brought them into the wilderness. So that's so much of what he was trying to do. He was trying to build them up. He was trying to show them how important his name is to be taken. So for the sake of his name, he is going to act. And this seems to be working or referring back to the events of the Exodus, the events of Exodus 32 and the golden calf. So he says this, when Moses is up there on the mountain, he tells him, go down, for your people whom you brought up out of the land of Egypt have become debased. They quickly turned aside from the path that I commanded for them. They have made a molten calf and worshipped it, and sacrificed to it, and said, this is your God, O Israel, that brought you up out of the land of Egypt. And Adonai said to Moses, I have seen this people that brought, it is a stiff-necked people. Now therefore leave me alone, so my wrath may burn hot against them, and so I may consume them, and make from you this great nation. So this is one of those examples of how he is trying to be protective of his name. They are not taking him seriously, so he is willing or seeking to wipe them out and start over. But notice what Moses appeals to in order to intercede for the people and to spare them. God's reputation and his promise is what he looks to. Verse 11 says, Then Moses sought Adonai his God and said, Adonai, why should your wrath burn hot against your people, whom you have brought forth out of the land of Egypt with great power and with a mighty hand? Why should the Egyptians say, He brought them out to do evil, to slay them in the mountains, and to annihilate them from the face of the earth? Turn your fierce wrath and relent from this destruction against your people. Remember Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, your servants, to whom you swore by your own self, and said to them, I will multiply your seed as the stars of heaven, and all this land that I have spoken of I will give to your offspring, and they will inherit it forever. So Adonai relented from the destruction that he said he would do to his people. So again, in order to intercede for the people, Moses appealed to his reputation. He appealed to the promises. God's name was going to be profaned, he was saying, if all of this takes place. The Egyptians would not understand. The Egyptians would mock him. And so to help prevent that, to grow this rabble, to grow this mixed multitude from Egypt into a nation that is actually pleasing to him, our Father did even more than just spare them. He gave his laws, his Torah, his judgments, his commands, with the hope that if only they had clear instructions, they would be able to honor his name. If they just had everything spelled out, what he would like, what pleases him, what doesn't please him, then they would surely get it right and not profane his name. That's how Ezekiel continues. When you look at that, he says, I gave them my laws, the chukah, and taught them my judgments, the mishpat, which if a man does, he will live by them. I also gave them my Shabbatot as a sign, between me and them, so that they would know that I am Adonai who made them holy. But the house of Israel rebelled against me in the wilderness. They did not walk in my statutes. They rejected my judgments, which if a man does, he will live by them. They greatly profaned my Shabbatot. Then I resolved to pour out my fury on them in the wilderness to consume them. But for the sake of my name, I did what would keep it from being profaned in the eyes of the nations, in whose sight I had brought them out. So again, so much of this is he certainly sees and recognizes their behavior. He certainly sees and recognizes that they are profaning his name, and it's on account of the protection of his name that he is going to do certain things or not do certain things. And so much in this Torah portion, so much in the surrounding scriptures are about the lives of the people of God and how their actions are going to do one or the other. And that's something that we need to understand as the people of God, is that our lives, our actions are going to either honor and glorify his name, or they are going to profane his name. It's one or the other. There's very little that's in between. And this often starts really with the leadership, with those that claim to be serving God, those responsible for the proper worship of God, like the priests. And that's where this portion begins in Leviticus 21. In verse 6, he says, these priests, these Kohen, are to be holy to their God and not profane the name of their God. For they present the offerings of Adonai made by fire, the bread of their God. Therefore, they are to be holy. And so all of the things that we see, surrounding this passage must be understood in these terms. The commands and instructions for what not to do are given to avoid profaning his name. It starts in verse 1 with the priests not becoming unclean with the dead. Their ministry is not to be focused on death, but on life. And so that's one of the differences between the God of Israel, the ones that worship him, the Lord. Many pagan religions, especially those of Egypt, focus on death. They focus on the dead. They focus not on life. They focus on that process of dying. The making burial situations, fixing those circumstances, mummifications, provisions for the afterlife. So much of the Egyptian religion was focused on what happens after the person dies and getting them ready for that. But not so with the priests of Adonai. Close relatives, those that you know, you can participate in those things, but not really for officiating purposes. You can go and be a part of those things for mourning because you're grieving that loss. Verse 5 of chapter 21 talks about them not shaving their heads or the corner of their beards, not cutting of their flesh. Much like what we see with the prophets of Baal doing in the confrontation with Elijah. They were trying to identify themselves in this certain role. They were even offering parts of themselves on the altar of their gods to try to get some kind of response. So they would cut from their hair, cut from their beard, and include it in the sacrifices and things of that sort. And that's different from the call that we have in Romans 12, where we're called to be living sacrifices. Our offering that is a fragrant aroma is our obedience to him, is our walk with him, our lives that glorify him. That is what he seeks after. It's not a piece of our hair or our flesh. And when you also consider how the pagan religions behaved and acted, so many of them included prostitution. They included sexual immorality as part of the worship. They were not to see those things and those behaviors as a way to serve God. Purity, not prostitution, honors the Lord. So the priest, it talks about them not taking a wife from among the prostitutes. They were not supposed to come from that kind of belief system, nor were their daughters to be used or given in that kind of belief system where they would offer their daughters as prostitutes to the gods. That's not how the people of God are supposed to live and operate. That kind of belief system does not honor God, and he wants nothing to do with it. That's chapter 22, verse 1, and he goes on to say this: Adonai spoke to Moses, saying, Tell Aaron and his sons to separate themselves from the holy things of Bnei Israel, which they consecrate to me, so that they would not, again, profane my holy name. I am Adonai. So he's suggesting then that these priests could profane his name by treating these holy things, these things consecrated to the Lord, as common. If they approach their work and their service, their worship, as no big deal, or like any other kind of job, that they can do it anytime they want, just show up, walk up, and go. And he's like, no. These holy things, these holy items required to conduct worship in the sanctuary, they are to be treated with reverence. How you approach what you are doing as a servant, as a minister of God, is supposed to be treated with reverence. These things, these items, they're not to be used like paperweights. They're not to take home and use on the dinner table or put to common use or treated as any other thing. And even the offerings themselves. He goes on in chapter 21, which a portion is typically given to one of the priests or one of the Levites. That's not to be passed around like an ordinary selection of food. That's not to be treated like something that you can just buy in the market, which is what the pagans again would do. They would sacrifice at the altar to their god these animals and this meat, and then take what was left or what was not used at the sacrifice to the market and sell it. And you'll recall that's one of the biggest concerns that we read about in the New Testament, in the apostolic writings, with that they would even had to deal with and address in the Jerusalem Council in Acts 15 about food being sacrificed to idols. No, he's like, no, these things are not supposed to be treated like that. That's what the nations do, and you're not supposed to worship me in this way. All these things and more things that were even listed here, are ways in which they could profane the name of the Lord. And again, that's what he said in a different Torah portion, in last week's Torah portion, chapter 20 of Leviticus 20 verse 22. He says, Now you are to keep all my statutes and all my ordinances and do them, so that the land where I am bringing you to dwell will not vomit you out. You are not to walk in the ways of the nation which I am casting out before you, for they did all of these things, and therefore I abhorred them. That's God's opinion of those types of behaviors and activities. That's what he thinks about that kind of worship. Walking in the ways of the nations, in ways that he abhors, that's how we go about profaning his name. That's how we go about breaking that commandment about taking the name of the Lord in vain. This is how we misuse the name of the Lord. Our actions and our worship is how we break this commandment. And it's more than just our words. It's more than just what we say. It's how we live. It's our actions. But, it's not like our words are not important. As James talks about, out of the same mouth come blessing and cursing. He says, my brothers, this should not be. But we should not be ones that invoke the name of God in worship in 1 minute and then profane his name by cursing in the next. And it's cursing in word or in action. It's one of the saddest testimonies of those that claim the name of God, who claim to love Messiah, claim to love Christ, that so many people, like in restaurants and places, they dread when church gets out because of the behavior of the people when they come into their facilities. He takes protecting his name seriously. He takes his name and protecting his name seriously. And we see that even in chapter 24 of this portion. chapter 24, verse 10. It says, "Now the son of an Israelite woman whose father was an Egyptian went out among Bnei Israel, and a fight broke out between the Israelite woman's son and an Israelite man. And the Israelite woman's son blasphemed the name and cursed. So they brought him to Moses. His mother's name was Shelomith, the daughter of Dibri, of the tribe of Dan. And they put him in custody until the will of Adonai could be declared to them." It says, "Then Adonai spoke to Moses, saying, Bring the one who cursed out of the camp, and let all who heard him lay their hands on his head, and have the entire congregation stone him. Then you will speak to Bnei Israel, saying, Whoever curses his God will bear his sin. Whoever blasphemes the name of Adonai must surely be put to death. The whole congregation must stone him, the outsider as well as the native born. When he blasphemes the name, is to be put to death." So now this, I'm with you on a lot of these things. This thing makes us uncomfortable. We don't particularly like it. But that reveals something about us. That reveals something about how far removed we are from taking our name seriously, or taking his name seriously. How far removed we are from an honor and a shame concept in our lives, in our family, or for our God. See, we bring shame and dishonor when we speak and act terribly toward those that we love. And not just upon them, we really bring shame and dishonor upon ourselves. Usually we think our words are going to be hurting them, and they often do, but they are really shaming ourselves with those things. And really what we need to also understand is how comfortable we are. We may not like this what he says. We may not be comfortable with that, but our comfort is not really the issue. What it is what it really reveals about the heart of God. That he takes his name, he takes his character, he takes his reputation very seriously. And those who love him, those who call on his name, those who worship him, who want to walk in his ways, rather than profaning his name, we should be seeking how we can honor or hallow his name. Really, that's something even Yeshua prayed for us, in the model prayer. I mean, that's the very first line of when we were asking, teach us how to pray, Jesus. He said, "Therefore pray in this way, Our Father in heaven, sanctified, hallowed be your name being honored as holy." So again, what does that reveal about the heart of God? What does that reveal about Yeshua, our Savior? That Yeshua wants his people, the ones that he taught as his disciples, the faith that he wants to make sure gets passed on, he wants his people to honor the name of the Father. And so how do we do that? How do we hallow, how do we honor his name? First of all, in looking at this Torah portion and this pattern that we see here, we need to understand that we honor his name. Well, let me put it like this. All the things that when God says not to do, if we do them, he has identified that as saying you are dishonoring and profaning his name. So we need to understand that. And those are some of the questions that we've asked, in our own journey about coming to these messianic perspectives and such, is that, if the scripture says not to do something and we are doing it in our faith, in our practice, in our walk, then why are we and when did we start? Because if he says not to do something and we're doing it, we need to understand we are profaning his name. And then on the flip side, if he says to do something and we're not doing it, then we have to ask the question, why aren't we and when did we start? Again, if he tells us to do something and we're not, then that means that we are profaning his name. So this must mean that if we obey, if disobeying what he says means that we're profaning his name, then that must mean if we obey what he says, then we are honoring his name. And that's what Yeshua himself tried to get across. If you love me, you will obey my commandments. If you love me, you will walk in my ways. Loving him, obeying him, that's honoring his name. That is giving glory to his name. He is pleased with that. He is glorified in that. So if hypocrisy dishonors him, then consistency honors him. And so that role of honoring him and his name, that was first. That was given. That was how the scriptures talk about it. That was given first to the Jewish people, to whom was given, the calling, the promises, the redemption, the Torah. All of those things were given so that they could honor and glorify his name. And it's through the disobedience that God's name was profaned among the nations. That was even Paul's message in Romans chapter 2. He says, but if you call yourself Jewish and rely upon the Torah and you boast in God and know his will and determine what matters because you are instructed from the Torah, and you are sure that you are a guide to the blind, a light to those who are in darkness, a corrector of the foolish, a teacher of the immature, having in the Torah the embodiment of knowledge and truth. He's saying, look, you've got all of these things going for you, and you think that has somehow made you better, that you're honoring God and all of that. He says, you then who teach another, do you not teach yourself? You who preach not to steal, do you steal? See, even though they have all of these things, they can still be profaning his name. You who say not to commit adultery, do you commit adultery? You who detest idols, do you rob temples? You who take pride in the Torah, through your violation of the Torah, do you dishonor God? And he's coming right down to it. For as it is written, the name of God is slandered among the nations because of you. He is making that exact same point. Even though you have it, even though you have the list, even though you have the Torah and all the things that he has given us, are you still keeping it? Are you honoring me by obeying what it says? See, what we need to understand is that the further the people of God, those who claim and call upon his name, the further we get away from his word, the further we get away from the Torah of God, the more that we are actually profaning his name. And some of our theology has actually built into it. We get away from the Torah of God, and so our theology has profaning his name built into it. So we in Messiah today, we have become just like the Jewish people that Paul is addressing. We may be claiming to love him. We may be claiming that the Bible is the Word of God, or that the Bible is our rule of faith and practice and all of those things. We may be claiming that we are guiding the blind and shining the light in the darkness, that we're correcting the wayward. But if we aren't living by and doing what his Word says, then we are also profaning his name among the nations. We do exactly the same thing. And it's built into our theology because we've been taught that we don't have to live that way. And so to reverse the course, we must be about living out the walk of faith that we are called to. A calling to his people, just like he gave to Abraham, to this call to walk before him and be blameless. That's not a one-time only kind of a call. That's for Abraham. That's for his descendants. That's for all of his people to walk in that way. And one way that we are to do that, one way we are to bring glory to his name, is here in this portion. And that's by making proclamations. There are certain things that we are supposed to proclaim among the nations that gives glory and honor to his name. And that starts with the feasts. Then Adonai spoke to Moses, saying, Speak to Bnei Israel and tell them, These are the appointed Moedim of Adonai, the appointed feasts of the Lord, which you are to proclaim to be holy or set apart convocations. my Moedim. They are his. And he says, I want you to proclaim them. I want you to announce them. I want you to demonstrate them. These are the appointed feasts of Adonai, holy convocations, which you are to proclaim in their appointed season. So it's not just any day, it's not just any time, it's at the appropriate time, the time that is consistent with his instruction. And so if we are going to proclaim his name, we are seeking to honor him and honor his name among the nations, then we need to be talking about the things that he wants us to talk about. We need to be proclaiming the things that he wants us to proclaim. And he wants us to proclaim the Messiah. He wants us to proclaim the good news of the kingdom. And if you think you can do that, and if you think you can do that without talking about the feasts, you're missing something. You should want to talk about, you should want to keep, you should want to guard and observe the feasts of the Lord because they are his, and they proclaim the message that we claim to be living for. They proclaim the good news. They proclaim the gospel of the kingdom. They proclaim Yeshua and everything he did. The feasts do that. You know, the spring feasts point to Messiah and what he did in taking away the sin of the world. The fall feasts point to Messiah Yeshua and what he will do in coming as the king in power and glory. And he wants us to be ready for those days, so we can know our part to play, so we can recognize what he is doing. Our God is calling us to meet and discuss these matters. First, even on a weekly basis, and called the Shabbat. That's the very first of his Moedim that he talks about here in Leviticus 23. Verse 3, work may be done for 6 days, but the seventh day is a Shabbat of solemn rest, a holy convocation. So we're supposed to be meeting on a weekly basis, and that proclaims and honors his name when we do it on the Shabbat. And then he also calls us to that yearly cycle called the feast of the Lord. And if we choose, this is where it gets kind of tough on us. If we choose to say that we have nothing to do with those things, we have nothing to do with those feasts, if we choose not to proclaim his days, but we choose to proclaim other days, to not show up for his days, but do celebrate and observe others, then we need to understand that he takes that seriously. And he considers that profaning his name. Because again, this is all in the context of worship and doing things that either will honor his name or profane his name. And if he sets a time, if he sets an appointment, and you don't show up for it, then that is profaning his name. It's kind of like a family, that has, regular reunions or regular events that, all of the family is invited to. But don't you know there's always that part of the family or that one person in the family that never shows up, never calls, never wants to be a part of what the family is doing, and so they miss everything. And the family's like, well, doesn't he care about us? Doesn't he want to be a part of us? Doesn't he or she, are they interested with us at all? And it's not because they're so far away that they can't make it. It's not because they're unable, but because they want to meet with other people on other days. They want to do other things. And if there's a conflict, they go to the other. They do the other thing rather than the thing that the family is doing together. If they have to do one or the other, they'll pick the other. And they even begin to think that the family events are not really for them at all, that they don't feel comfortable, that they don't feel welcome, that's something different. And so their identity is no longer identified with their family, but with these other things that they are doing. And consider how strange it would be in that kind of situation, that at these other events that the person is choosing to go to, that the other people that they talk about, that they talk about how much they love their family at these other places. They talk about how great their family is and how they wish they could spend more time with them. Wouldn't that sound odd? If they're choosing to be somewhere else, choosing to do other things other than with their family, but they keep talking about how great their family is. It's been so long since they've attended any of their own family events that they don't even think about them anymore. Don't even consider going. So they are honoring their family with their lips, but their hearts are far from him or from them. Their actions speak louder than their words. They say they love their family, but their actions say they don't really want anything to do with them. That's in many ways what we can be doing when we don't have anything to do with the days that the Father is calling the family together. And again, I'll say this again, that God takes these feasts seriously. He takes participating in his feasts seriously because they proclaim his name and they proclaim his goodness. This here in Leviticus 23 and the call to proclaim the feast, that is a regular invitation from the Father to a family banquet. That's what he is doing. He is calling his people together. And that is the spirit in which Yeshua told the parable about that invitation to the wedding banquet, to the wedding feast in Matthew chapter 22. Yeshua answered and spoke to them again in parables, saying, "The kingdom of heaven may be compared to a king who made a wedding feast for his son." That is the entire message of the gospel. That the son has gone out in pursuit of his bride. But look what happens when he sends out. He has these messages. He has these invitations that he's giving. He wants everybody to be there at the wedding banquet. And so verse 3, he sent out his servants to call those who were invited to the wedding feast, but they wouldn't come. And this is the king. The king is giving them a personal invitation, and they don't come. Again, he sent out other servants, and those would be akin to the prophets, saying, "Tell those who were invited, look, I've prepared my meal. My oxen and fatted cattle are killed, and everything is ready. Come to the wedding feast." That's what he keeps saying to us. That's what he keeps saying to the people of God. That's what these feasts in Leviticus 23 are supposed to be. They are supposed to be the Lord inviting all of us to what he is doing and what he is celebrating, this wedding feast of his son. But paying no attention, they went away. One to his own farm, another to his own business. The rest grabbed his servants, humiliated them, and killed them. That's how we have oftentimes treated the things of God. That's how we've oftentimes treated the feasts of God. And so we have profaned his name. We have profaned and rejected his invitation. And look at how the king responds. The king became furious. And sending his troops, he destroyed those murderers and set fire to their city. Then he said to his servants, "The wedding feast is ready, but those who were invited were not worthy. So go into the highways and byways, invite everyone you find to the wedding feast." And those servants went out into the highways and gathered together all they found, both bad and good, and the wedding was filled with guests. What he is seeking, what he is desiring, what the Lord is hoping for is that his banquet hall is filled. And these feasts are pictures of all of that. Because the last of the feast is a Feast of Tabernacles. And it's the gathering of the nations. It is the wedding feast is what it is a picture of. It is a celebration of the King and his reign. That's in our future. That's Revelation. The end of Revelation is the wedding supper of the Lamb. And so if you don't have anything to do with his feast, then guess what? You're profaning his name in the meantime. Because the Father wants to fill his banquet, wants to fill his appointed times with people who love him and honor his name. And when we reject his feast, we are rejecting his invitation to the banquet because we'd rather be somewhere else, doing something else with somebody else. We make all sorts of excuses, even theological ones, like they're all done away with, or like those are just for the Jews. But he sees our rejection as a profaning of his name and a rejection of him. And so instead of participating in his feasts and those types of things, we worship like the nations on days that he has not called us to worship on. And so we profane his name among the nations. And that's one of the things that I'm excited about in this day and age. I am thankful that he is awakening his people to hear his voice, he's moving in their hearts to accept his invitation to his banquets. I'm thankful that a move of the Father is happening among those who claim to love him, both Jew and Gentile. He is opening eyes. For the Jewish people, their eyes are being opened to the identity of Messiah Yeshua. And for the Gentile people, our eyes are being opened to the ways of the Father, his feast, his Torah. And together, we are both receiving correction from the Father so that we can better proclaim and honor his name. Together, when we are both celebrating and honoring him and his ways, it's the banquet hall is full. That's what he's looking forward to. That's what he's hoping for. He wants us to proclaim and honor his name, not profane his name. Proclaiming his name, that's all going to perish. That's all going to be over and done with. Profaning his name is going to perish when he returns. But proclaiming his name, honoring his name, that is what is going to endure. And so may we more and more, may more of us as the people of God learn and grow and understand how we can be proclaiming and honoring his holy name. Because that is our purpose. That is worshiping him. And anything less, he is going to correct us and call us to a higher walk. Father, I just come before you and praise you and seek your face. May we as your people truly begin to know you, to know your ways. May we hear that call to reject the ways of the nations, to not try to worship you in the way that the nations do, but Lord, to worship you in spirit and in truth as your word clearly speaks. Lord, be exalted and glorified in us. Show us your favor. Pour out your mercy upon us. And may we be about honoring your name, hallowing your name with everything we do and everything we say. And I ask this in the name of Yeshua HaMashiach, Jesus the Messiah. Amen. I do want to, we're going to continue on here, but just remember that our website is restorationmessiah.com. If you have any questions or comments and things that you want to say, it's Pastor Kelly at restorationmessiah.com. If you have any support that you want to send to this ministry, we have a P.O. Box 1271 in Talbot, Tennessee, 37811. We are looking forward to the day when we can meet together and come together in person. So if you're also in East Tennessee, we'd love to have you come over to Morristown when all of that gets started back up. Hopefully it'll be the end of the month. That's the projected time. But we are looking forward to that.